When we think about politics today, we usually imagine parliaments, presidents, elections, parties, and the endless debates on television. For many people, politics has become a game of power, a contest of who wins and who loses. But more than 2,000 years ago, Aristotle saw politics very differently. To him, politics was not just about power struggles. It was about something deeper, something natural, something necessary for human life itself. Aristotle, the great philosopher and student of Plato, lived in ancient Greece during the 4th century before Christ. He observed how human beings behaved, how they lived together, and how they organized their communities. From these observations, he concluded that politics is at the very heart of human existence. We are not made to live alone. We are not complete in isolation. We are born into families, raised in households, and naturally drawn to form friendships, alliances, and societies. For Aristotle, politics was not an optional activity, like a hobby one might choose or reject. It was not something external that rulers forced upon the people. Instead, he argued that politics is part of human nature itself. Just as birds flock together and bees form hives, human beings come together in communities. But unlike animals, we have reason and speech. We can discuss what is just and unjust, what is good and bad, what is fair and unfair. This unique ability makes us political animals. Aristotle begins his politics not by jumping directly into the affairs of governments or kings, but by asking a simple question: what is the basic building block of society? To answer this, he traces human life step by step, from the smallest unit to the largest. He starts with the household, which includes the relationships between master and slave, husband and wife, and parent and child. From many households, villages are formed, and when villages grow and unite for higher purposes, they form the city-state, what the Greeks called the polis. For modern leaders, this starting point is crucial. Before we can understand laws, institutions, or constitutions, we must understand human nature and the natural communities that arise from it. Leadership is not simply about authority written on paper, but about guiding natural human associations toward their highest good. This is why Aristotle begins Book One with the bold claim that the polis, the political community, is natural and that it exists for the highest human good. The first chapter explores this in detail, showing us why the city-state is not a human invention, but a natural expression of who we are as human beings. Chapter 1. The polis as natural. Aristotle begins his journey into politics with a simple but powerful statement. Every community exists for the sake of some good. No group of people comes together without a purpose. Families exist to provide daily needs. Villages exist to make life more secure and organized. And the city-state, or the polis, exists for the highest good of all. The polis is the complete community. It is not only larger than the household or the village, but also more perfect. While families provide survival and villages provide security, the polis provides the conditions for living well. It gives people the chance not only to exist, but to flourish. For Aristotle, to live well is the true goal of human life. He explains that human beings are different from other animals. Animals can form groups, but they do so only for survival. Wolves hunt in packs, bees work in hives, and birds fly in flocks. Human beings, however, form communities for something higher. We have the unique gift of speech and reason. Through speech, we can share ideas of justice and injustice, good and evil, fairness and unfairness. This ability allows us to create laws, debate values, and imagine a common future. Because of this, Aristotle says, humans are by nature political animals. Just as fish belong in water and birds belong in the sky, human beings belong in the polis. A person who lives outside the community, by choice and not by accident, is either a beast or a god, not a human being. In other words, to reject political life is to reject one's own humanity. For modern leaders, this teaching has deep meaning. It reminds us that politics is not just about ambition, rivalry, or temporary gain. It is about fulfilling a natural human need. People long for connection, justice, and shared purpose. A political leader is therefore not simply a ruler, but a guide who helps the community achieve its highest potential. Aristotle's message is also clear for those who see politics as dirty or corrupt. He would say that while corruption exists, the very act of political life is noble and natural. It is the arena where humans become most human. Leaders who enter politics with this understanding will see themselves not merely as holders of power, but as servants of human flourishing. By beginning with the idea that the polis is natural, Aristotle sets the foundation for everything else in the book. He shows us that political communities are not artificial creations, like machines built in a factory. They grow naturally from human needs and human nature itself. This insight leads directly to the next step in his argument. If the city-state grows naturally, then we must understand its origins. And to understand its origins, we must study its smallest part, the household. Just as a tree cannot be understood without knowing its roots, the polis cannot be understood without knowing the family. This is why in the next chapter, Aristotle turns to the household and its parts. Chapter 2. The household and its parts. After explaining that the polis is natural, Aristotle moves one step backward to ask an important question. If the city-state grows naturally, what are its roots? What is the smallest unit from which everything else arises? Aristotle answers by pointing to the household. The household, he says, is the first and most basic community. It is not created by laws or agreements, but by nature itself. Every person is born into a family, and it is in the family that life begins. Without the household, there would be no villages, and without villages, there would be no city-state. According to Aristotle, the household is made up of three main relationships. The first is the relation of master and slave. The second is the relation of husband and wife. The third is the relation of parent and child. These three together form the foundation of the household. Each has its own character, its own form of authority, and its own purpose. The relationship of master and slave, Aristotle says, is about work and survival. The master provides direction, while the slave provides labor. Together they meet the practical needs of life. The relationship of husband and wife is about cooperation. It is not the same as master and slave, for here both partners contribute in their own way to the household. The relationship of parent and child is about guidance and growth. Parents exercise authority, but this authority is temporary, meant to prepare children for independence. In this way, Aristotle shows that every household is like a small kingdom. It contains different forms of rule within it, but these forms are not the same as political rule. Household authority is personal and limited, while political authority is broader and shared among equals. For modern leaders, the lesson is powerful. Just as a tree grows from its roots, society grows from households. A state cannot be healthy if its families are weak or broken. Strong political life requires strong family life. Leaders who wish to build a stable society must support families, respect the dignity of each role within them, and ensure that the bonds of care and authority are protected. Aristotle also reminds us that leadership starts at home. Before one can rule a city, one must learn how to guide a household. A person who cannot manage his or her closest relationships will struggle to manage a larger community. Leadership, therefore, begins with the smallest unit and rises step by step to the highest. This careful attention to the household leads Aristotle to his next topic. If the household is made of three relationships, then we must look closely at each one. The first he chooses to explore is slavery. He asks whether slavery is truly natural or only a human invention. This is the subject of the next chapter. Chapter 3. Slavery, natural versus conventional. Aristotle now turns to the first relationship within the household, the relation between master and slave. In his time, slavery was a common reality, but Aristotle does not simply accept it without thought. Instead, he asks a deep question: is slavery natural, or is it merely a human invention forced by power and war? He begins by arguing that some people are slaves by nature. According to him, a natural slave is a person who lacks the full ability to guide his own life. Such a person can understand the orders of another, but cannot make decisions independently. For this reason, Aristotle says, it is actually good for such a person to be ruled. The master provides reason and direction, while the slave provides labor and obedience. In this way, both benefit. But Aristotle also makes an important distinction. Not all slavery is natural. Some slavery happens only because of conquest in war or force in society. In such cases, a free person may be enslaved against his nature. Aristotle considers this unjust and wrong. Enslaving someone who is by nature free is not natural but conventional. It is based only on human laws, not on reason or nature. This distinction may sound strange to modern ears. Today we reject slavery completely as immoral and inhuman. But for Aristotle's time, this idea was revolutionary. By saying that not all slavery is just, he opened the door to questioning practices that others simply accepted. For modern leaders, this chapter carries a deeper lesson beyond the question of slavery itself. The real issue is about the legitimacy of authority. What makes one person's rule over another right or wrong? Is it enough to say, "I have power, therefore I can rule"? Aristotle's answer is no. Rule is legitimate only when it benefits both sides and reflects the natural order. Rule based only on force is unjust and unstable. This idea can be applied in modern political life. A government that rules only through fear, violence, or control may survive for a time but cannot last. True leadership must be based on reason, fairness, and the good of those being ruled. Just as enslaving a free person is unjust, ruling citizens as if they were slaves is also unjust. Aristotle's discussion of slavery also reveals his method of thinking. He does not take institutions for granted. Instead, he asks whether they are natural, whether they serve a purpose, and whether they are just. For aspiring leaders today, this is a valuable skill. Do not accept things as they are simply because they have always been so. Ask whether they are right, whether they serve the common good, and whether they respect human dignity. Having explored the question of natural versus conventional slavery, Aristotle is ready to go deeper into the household. If slavery is one type of rule within the household, how does it compare to other types of rule? Is ruling a slave the same as ruling a family or ruling a city? These questions lead him into the next chapter, where he examines mastery and household rule. Chapter 4. Mastery and Household Rule. After discussing slavery, Aristotle now asks whether the way a master rules a slave is the same as the way a household head rules his family, or the way a statesman rules citizens. At first, it may seem that all kinds of rule are alike, but Aristotle insists that they are not the same. He explains that mastery, the rule of a master over a slave, is limited in purpose. The master directs the slave to perform tasks that secure the household's survival. The goal is practical and immediate. It is about labor and necessity. Household rule, on the other hand, is broader. It includes not only the authority of the master over slaves, but also the authority of the husband over the wife and the parent over the child. Each of these relationships has a different nature and requires a different kind of leadership. Household rule is not simply about commanding, but also about guiding, nurturing, and cooperating. Political rule is different still. In politics, the ruler does not command subordinates in the same way as a master commands a slave. Instead, the ruler governs over free and equal citizens. Here, the ruler must persuade, discuss, and make laws that apply to all, including himself. Unlike mastery, political leadership is shared, cooperative, and oriented toward the common good. For Aristotle, confusing these forms of rule is dangerous. If a ruler treats citizens as if they were slaves, injustice and resentment will grow. If a husband treats his wife as a servant, the household will lack harmony. Each type of rule must be exercised according to its true nature. For modern leaders, this distinction is extremely important. Leadership in a democratic state cannot be modeled on the command of a master. Citizens are not tools, but partners in building the political community. Modern politics requires listening, debate, and fairness. Even in business or organizations, leadership that confuses authority with domination will fail. The wise leader adjusts his style of rule depending on the relationship and the context. Aristotle's analysis shows that leadership is not one single skill that can be applied everywhere. A leader must understand the different types of authority and exercise them properly. A parent must guide children with patience. A spouse must cooperate with respect. A ruler must govern citizens with justice and equality. And a master, in Aristotle's ancient world, must direct slaves with responsibility. Each context demands its own balance of authority and care. By clarifying these distinctions, Aristotle prepares the ground for his next theme. Since households need resources to survive, he now turns to the question of property and how it is acquired. What kind of acquisition is natural and what kind is harmful? This is the subject of the next chapter. Chapter 5. Acquisition of Property. After explaining the kinds of rule within the household, Aristotle turns to another important matter. A household cannot survive without resources. Property is necessary for life. Without food, shelter, tools, and goods, neither the family nor the city can exist. Aristotle begins by saying that every household must have some form of property to meet its needs. Property is not an end in itself, but a means to live well. Just as a craftsman needs tools to practice his art, a household needs resources to sustain itself. He then makes an important distinction. There are two kinds of acquisition. The first kind is natural. The second kind is unnatural. Natural acquisition means obtaining what is required for life. Farming, herding animals, fishing, and gathering goods from the earth are all natural. They provide food and shelter. They give what is necessary for survival. In this sense, property is part of nature's order. Unnatural acquisition, however, is different. This is the pursuit of wealth beyond need. It is not aimed at living, but at accumulating endlessly. It goes beyond the limits of necessity. Aristotle believes that when people seek wealth without measure, they fall into greed and corruption. To explain this, he uses the example of money. Money was originally created as a tool of exchange. It helped people trade fairly. But over time, some began to use money not just as a tool, but as a way to store endless wealth. For Aristotle, this was unnatural. Wealth should serve life. Life should not be sacrificed for the sake of wealth. For modern leaders, Aristotle's message is striking. An economy must be built to serve human needs, not the other way around. When the pursuit of wealth becomes unlimited, it creates inequality, instability, and injustice. Leaders who encourage endless accumulation without balance risk destroying the harmony of society. This distinction between natural and unnatural acquisition is more relevant than ever. Even today, debates about economic justice, sustainability, and fair distribution of resources reflect Aristotle's concern. A wise leader must ensure that property supports the community and does not undermine it. Aristotle also emphasizes moderation. He does not say that property itself is bad. On the contrary, property is necessary and good when it serves life. But when people treat property as the highest goal, they lose sight of what truly matters. In this way, Aristotle reminds us that economics is not separate from ethics. How we acquire and use property is a moral question as much as a practical one. The purpose of property is to allow households and communities to live well. Having drawn this distinction, Aristotle is ready to explore the subject more deeply. In the next chapter, he will explain the different arts of acquisition and how they can either support or damage human life. Chapter 6. Property and the Art of Acquisition. Aristotle now goes further into the question of property. In the last chapter, he explained that there are two kinds of acquisition, natural and unnatural. In this chapter, he studies more closely the different arts of acquiring property and the dangers that arise when people misunderstand them. He begins by saying that the natural art of acquisition is honorable. Farming, herding, fishing, hunting, and all the ways by which nature provides food are proper to human life. These activities produce the goods needed for survival. They are limited by necessity, and because of this, they are guided by reason. But there is another form of acquisition, one that Aristotle calls the art of money-making. This is where the danger lies. At first, money was invented to make trade easier. If a farmer had grain and needed shoes, money allowed him to exchange fairly with a shoemaker. In this way, money was a tool of balance. However, some people began to treat money not only as a tool, but as an object of endless desire. Instead of exchanging fairly, they sought to accumulate money without limit. This, Aristotle says, is unnatural. It turns property from a servant of life into a master of life. The most striking example he gives is lending money at interest. For Aristotle, this is one of the most unnatural forms of wealth. Money by itself is barren. It is not like land that can grow crops or animals that can reproduce. When people make money from money alone, without producing anything useful, they distort its true purpose. Such practices encourage greed and exploitation. For modern leaders, this teaching offers a sharp warning. An economy must not lose sight of its purpose, which is to serve life. If financial systems become disconnected from real human needs, society will suffer. Wealth that grows without producing value creates instability, corruption, and injustice. Leaders must therefore encourage productive industries and restrain harmful practices that exploit the vulnerable. Aristotle also reminds us that property should be connected to virtue. Having enough resources to live well is important, but it is not the highest good. The highest good is a life of moral excellence and active participation in the community. Property is valuable only as long as it supports this goal. For modern readers, this means that wealth alone cannot define success. A leader must look beyond economic numbers and ask whether people are truly living well. Do they have not only food and shelter, but also education, fairness, dignity, and opportunity? By making this distinction, Aristotle shows that economics and politics are deeply connected. A political leader cannot ignore how property is acquired and used. The health of the household and the stability of the city depend on the right balance between natural needs and unnatural greed. This discussion leads naturally to the next step. Since households need property to survive, and since different forms of rule exist within them, how does household rule relate to political rule? Can we understand the state by looking at the family? This is the question Aristotle takes up in the next chapter. Chapter 7. The Household and Political Rule. After studying property and its proper use, Aristotle turns back to the nature of rule itself. He asks whether the way a household is governed is the same as the way a city is governed. Many people assume they are the same, but Aristotle argues they are not. The household, he explains, is a smaller and more personal unit. It includes different types of relationships, such as master and slave, husband and wife, parent and child. Each of these involves authority, but the kind of authority is not identical. Household rule is about meeting daily needs, guiding dependence, and maintaining survival. Political rule, on the other hand, is broader and more complex. It does not deal with dependence but with free citizens who are equal in nature. A political leader does not command in the same way a master commands a slave or a parent instructs a child. Instead, political authority is shared. It is exercised over people who have the capacity to govern themselves. Aristotle says that the key difference is equality. In the household, authority is unequal. The master has more power than the slave. The parent has more power than the child. The husband in Aristotle's world has more authority than the wife. But in politics, citizens are equal. They take turns ruling and being ruled. They participate in decision-making. They are partners in the pursuit of the common good. For modern leaders, this distinction is essential. A state cannot be treated as a private household. Citizens are not servants of the ruler. They are free individuals who deserve respect and participation. Leadership in politics must be based on justice, fairness, and dialogue. Aristotle's warning is especially powerful for those who confuse personal authority with public authority. A ruler who treats the state as if it were his household, or as if the citizens were his private property, will corrupt political life. True politics is not about domination, but about partnership. At the same time, Aristotle shows that the household and the polis are connected. The household provides the material and emotional foundation of society, but the polis elevates life to its highest purpose. The household gives survival. The polis gives the good life. Together they form the natural order of human existence. This comparison prepares the way for Aristotle's next step. If household rule is different from political rule, we must look more closely at the specific parts of the household. We have already discussed slavery in general, but what exactly is the role of the slave? How does the slave fit into the life of the household? This is the subject of the next chapter. Chapter 8. The role of the slave. Aristotle now looks more closely at the slave within the household. He has already explained that some forms of slavery may be natural, while others are not. In this chapter, he explains what role the slave plays in the life of the household. He begins with a simple idea. The slave is a kind of living tool. Just as tools like plows or pots serve the master's needs, the slave also serves. The difference is that a tool is lifeless, while a slave has life and can understand commands. The slave is able to carry out tasks that free the master for higher activities. For Aristotle, this is important because he believes that leisure is necessary for greatness. If citizens are occupied only with manual labor, they will not have time for philosophy, politics, or war. By having slaves do the hard work, free citizens can dedicate themselves to ruling, thinking, and creating. The slave's role is therefore functional. The slave is part of the household's organization, like an extension of the master's will. In Aristotle's view, the master provides reason, while the slave provides labor. Together, they form a unity that serves the needs of the household. Of course, for modern readers, this argument feels deeply troubling. We no longer accept the idea of one human being as a living tool of another. Every person has dignity, rights, and freedom. But by studying Aristotle's perspective, we see how ancient societies justified practices that we now reject. It also teaches us how ideas of labor, hierarchy, and leisure were connected in classical thought. For modern leaders, the lesson is not to defend slavery, but to think about the organization of work in society. Every community depends on labor, both intellectual and physical. Leaders must respect the dignity of all workers. Without their contribution, no city or nation can survive. The challenge for political leadership is to ensure that labor is valued fairly and that leisure is not reserved for only a few. Aristotle's analysis also raises a larger question. If slaves are part of the household, what kind of relationship should exist between master and slave? Should the master rule harshly or with care? Should the slave be treated as property or as a human being? These questions lead directly to the next chapter, where Aristotle discusses the master-slave relationship in detail. Chapter 9. Master-slave relationship. Aristotle now turns from the role of the slave to the nature of the relationship between master and slave. This relationship is central to the household, and he wants to explain how it should properly function. He begins by saying that mastery is a kind of art or skill. Just as a ruler must know how to govern citizens, a master must know how to govern slaves. The difference, however, lies in the type of authority. The master commands the slave not as an equal, but as one who provides reason to another who provides labor. Aristotle explains that the master-slave relationship is not the same as political rule. In politics, rulers and citizens share power and take turns in governing. But in the household, the master's authority is permanent. The slave is always subject to the master, because by nature, Aristotle believes, the slave lacks the full capacity for reason. The master's role, then, is to direct the work of the slave so that the household can function. The slave provides the body, the master provides the mind. The two together make up a partnership, though not one of equals. It is a relationship of command and obedience. Still, Aristotle adds that mastery should not be cruel or destructive. A master should not treat slaves like mere objects to be broken or wasted. The purpose of rule is always to bring order and benefit. The slave should be treated in a way that respects his usefulness and humanity, even if Aristotle does not extend full equality. For modern readers, this relationship is deeply problematic. Today, we reject the idea that one human being is naturally destined to obey another. Yet Aristotle's reflections still carry lessons. They remind us that leadership is not just about power, but about responsibility. Even in unjust systems, the question of how leaders treat those under them remains important. For modern political leaders, the principle can be translated into how they treat workers, citizens, or subordinates. Do they rule with fairness, or do they exploit? Do they see people only as tools, or do they recognize their dignity? Leadership always involves a balance between authority and care. By studying this ancient relationship, we gain insight into the roots of authority and command. It prepares us for Aristotle's next step. If he has examined the master-slave relationship, he now turns to another key relationship in the household. That is the relationship between husband and wife. Chapter 10. Husband-wife relationship. After examining the relationship between master and slave, Aristotle now turns to the relationship between husband and wife. This is another essential part of the household, and he explains how it differs from other forms of rule. Aristotle begins by saying that the husband rules the wife, but not in the same way that a master rules a slave. The difference lies in the kind of authority. The master has absolute control, while the husband's rule is more political in nature. This means it is based on both command and partnership. In Aristotle's view, the husband possesses reason in a stronger form. The wife also has reason, but not in the same capacity. Therefore, the husband is naturally suited to lead, while the wife participates by supporting and sharing in the household's work. He stresses that this rule is not harsh or despotic. It is not about domination, but about guidance. The husband provides direction while the wife provides cooperation and balance. Together, they form a partnership aimed at the good of the household. Aristotle also points out that men and women have different natural roles. Men are generally suited to public life, politics, and war. Women are more suited to private life and the upbringing of children. This division of labor ensures harmony, according to Aristotle. Of course, for modern readers, these views may feel outdated and unequal. Today we value the equality of men and women, both in public and private life. But in Aristotle's time, these distinctions reflected the common beliefs of Greek society. Still, modern leaders can draw lessons here. The household is the first school of leadership. How a husband and wife relate to each other sets the tone for family life and even for society. If leadership is based only on domination, the family suffers. If it is based on respect, care, and shared purpose, the family thrives. For aspiring leaders today, the key point is that partnership matters. No leader can succeed without cooperation. Leadership is not only about command, but also about listening, balancing, and supporting others. The model of husband and wife, even if shaped by ancient assumptions, still teaches the importance of partnership in leadership. Aristotle now prepares to move from the husband-wife relationship to the third essential bond within the household. After looking at master and slave, and then husband and wife, he turns to the relationship between parent and child. This will complete his picture of household authority before connecting it back to the larger polis. Chapter 11. Parent-child relationship. Aristotle now completes his study of the household by turning to the third and final relationship. That is the relationship between parent and child. He begins by noting that the parent-child bond is different from both master-slave and husband-wife. In this case, the parent rules with natural affection and responsibility. The authority of the parent is not about control alone. It is about guidance, education, and preparing the child for life. Aristotle explains that the parent's authority is natural because children lack the maturity and judgment needed for independence. Just as a seed needs time to grow into a tree, children need time and direction to become full citizens. The parent is therefore like a guardian who protects and shapes the child until he or she can use reason fully. Unlike the master-slave relationship, the rule of parent over child is temporary. It changes as the child grows. In the early years, the parent commands more directly. As the child matures, the relationship becomes one of teaching and persuasion. Finally, the child grows into an adult who can live independently and contribute to the polis. Aristotle also notes that this relationship reflects nature's order. Parents bring children into the world, and so they naturally have the right and duty to guide them. But this duty is not unlimited power. It carries responsibility to nurture, protect, and teach. The goal is not obedience for its own sake, but the development of virtue and reason. For Aristotle, the household is the first school of virtue. Children learn about justice, courage, and moderation, not from laws alone, but from their parents. The parent-child relationship is therefore the foundation of good citizenship. If parents fail, the polis will suffer. If parents succeed, the polis will thrive with virtuous citizens. From a modern perspective, Aristotle's insight still holds. Today, we no longer see parental authority as absolute, but we still recognize that family is the first place where children learn values, discipline, and responsibility. Leadership in society begins with leadership in the home. For modern political leaders, this chapter offers an important lesson. Just as parents must guide their children toward independence, leaders must guide their citizens toward responsibility and maturity. True leadership is not about keeping people dependent. It is about preparing them to stand on their own, think critically, and contribute to the community. With this final relationship, Aristotle completes his study of the household. He has looked at the authority of master over slave, husband over wife, and parent over child. Together, these relationships form the basic structure of the household, which in turn forms the foundation of the polis. In the next stages of his work, Aristotle will connect the household more directly to the city. He will explore how the private relationships of family and property grow into the public life of laws and government. In this way, the small unit of the household expands into the great unit of the polis. Conclusion of Book One. With the completion of these 11 chapters, Aristotle brings the first book of politics to a close. He began by showing that the polis, or city-state, is natural. Human beings are political by nature, meant to live together in communities. The polis is not an artificial creation. It grows naturally out of smaller associations like the household and the village. Only in the polis can humans achieve their fullest potential. Aristotle then turned to the household, the most basic unit of social life. He examined its different parts and showed how each relationship contributes to the larger order. The household is not only about survival, it is about shaping character, creating order, and preparing citizens for life in the polis. He explored the question of slavery. Aristotle argued that some forms of slavery are natural, while others are conventional. Although his ideas reflect the culture of his time, he tried to show that power must have a rational basis. Leadership is legitimate only when it serves the natural good of both master and slave. He also examined mastery and household rule. The authority of the master, the husband, and the parent each have different forms. A master rules absolutely. A husband rules through partnership. A parent rules through guidance and care. These distinctions reveal Aristotle's effort to describe power not as one single thing, but as something that takes many shapes depending on the relationship. Property was another key subject. Aristotle explained that property and the art of acquisition are necessary for life, but they must be guided by moderation. He warned against greed and the endless pursuit of wealth. Property should serve the household and the polis, not dominate them. This lesson remains powerful for leaders today. The role of the slave, the master-slave bond, the husband-wife partnership, and the parent-child relationship were all described as essential elements of the household. Aristotle showed how each of these bonds reflected both authority and responsibility. Power, in his view, always comes with a duty to guide others toward their natural purpose. For modern readers and aspiring leaders, Book One offers many lessons. It reminds us that leadership begins in small units before it reaches great ones. The way a person leads in the home reflects how they may lead in society. The way authority is used in private life shapes the way it is used in public life. It also teaches that leadership is not about domination. It is about guiding, balancing, and serving the good of the community. Whether in the household or in the polis, true leadership means using reason to create harmony and virtue. Finally, Aristotle's careful attention to each form of relationship reminds us that politics is not abstract. It is lived in daily life. It begins in the family, extends to the village, and matures in the city. The polis is simply the household made greater. The art of ruling a household is therefore deeply connected to the art of ruling a state. With Book One concluded, Aristotle prepares to move forward. In the next parts of politics, he will expand his analysis from the household to the polis itself. He will explore constitutions, justice, and the different forms of government. But everything he builds later rests on the foundation of Book One. For without understanding the household, we cannot understand the city.